I specifically requested that my seat be isolated from any undesirable passengers, and I expect that arrangement to be honored." The sharp, imperious voice cut through the usually serene atmosphere of the Pinnacle Airways Crown Elite Lounge like a knife through silk. Victoria Whitmore stood at the mahogany concierge desk, her perfectly manicured fingernails drumming an impatient rhythm against the polished surface. At 52, she wore her wealth-like armor, a pristine Armani blazer in charcoal gray, a Hermes Birkin bag worth more than most people's cars clutched in her diamond-ringed fingers, and an expression of perpetual disdain that suggested the world owed her something it could never quite deliver. Behind the desk, Carlos Mendez maintained his professional smile despite the growing knot in his stomach. At 28, he'd been managing the Crown Elite Lounge for 3 years, and he'd dealt with entitled passengers before. But something about Mrs. Whitmore's tone carried an edge that made him deeply uncomfortable. "Mrs. Whitmore," Carlos said, his voice calm and measured, "you're confirmed in seat 2B on flight 4228 to London. It's one of our flagship first-class suites with complete privacy. The seat beside you, 2A, is unoccupied, so you'll have the entire pod section to yourself." Victoria's perfectly sculpted eyebrows drew together in a frown. "What about seat 1A? I can see from here it's the premium position. Who's sitting there?" "We maintain strict passenger privacy policies," Carlos replied carefully. "I can confirm that your seating arrangement will provide the exclusive experience you've requested." "Don't give me corporate nonsense." Victoria snapped, her voice rising enough that other passengers in the lounge began to glance in their direction. "I pay $15,000 for these tickets. My husband Richard is a major investor in commercial real estate, including airport properties. When I ask a simple question, I expect a direct answer." In the far corner of the lounge, tucked into a high-backed leather armchair that seemed to swallow her slight frame, 19-year-old Jasmine Brooks looked up from her worn paperback copy of Leadership in Crisis. She wore an oversized gray hoodie with Harvard Medical emblazoned across the front in faded crimson letters, dark jeans that had seen better days, and scuffed white sneakers that looked like they'd walked through half of Boston. Large noise-canceling headphones hung around her neck, and a simple black backpack sat at her feet. To any casual observer, she looked exactly like what she was supposed to look like, a college student who'd somehow managed to scrape together enough money for a lounge day pass, maybe the daughter of airline employees using staff privileges. What they couldn't see was the sharp intelligence in her dark eyes as she observed Victoria's performance, or the way her fingers moved across her phone screen, taking careful notes. Text to Dad. Interesting customer behavior, developing in Crown Lounge. Full discrimination protocol may be necessary. Response from Damon. Remember what we discussed. Sometimes the best education comes from watching people reveal themselves completely. Jasmine smiled slightly and returned her attention to the escalating situation at the concierge desk. Mrs. Whitmore, Carlos was saying, his patience clearly being tested. "I understand your preference for privacy. However, I cannot share passenger manifests or seating details for other travelers. What I can tell you is that every passenger in our Crown Lounge has been thoroughly vetted and meets our Diamond Tier membership requirements." Vetted Victoria laughed, but there was nothing pleasant about the sound. "Look around this lounge, young man. Do you see anyone who doesn't belong? Anyone who looks like they're here because of diversity quotas rather than merit?" The question hung in the air like smoke, thick and toxic. Near the champagne bar, a distinguished businessman in his 40s, David Peterson, according to the name on his laptop case, shifted uncomfortably in his chair. By the window, a young woman with a professional camera and laptop open was frantically typing, occasionally glancing up with barely concealed outrage. Her press badge identified her as Emma Thompson, freelance travel journalist. Carlos felt sweat forming under his collar. 3 years of customer service training hadn't prepared him for this level of blatant discrimination, especially not from someone who clearly had the connections to make his life difficult. "Ma'am," he said carefully. All of our guests are here based on their membership status and— Their membership status? Victoria interrupted, her voice dripping with sarcasm. How exactly does someone like that— She gestured vaguely toward Jasmine's corner. Afford Crown Elite membership. What's the monthly fee now? $3,000? I doubt she makes that in 6 months. Jasmine's pen paused mid-word. She looked up again, meeting Victoria's gaze for just a moment before returning to her notes. Her expression remained completely neutral, but something flickered in her eyes. Not anger, but calculation. Note to self. Subject exhibits classic discriminatory profiling based on appearance and assumed economic status. Clear violation of company equal treatment policies. Recommend immediate intervention training for all customer-facing staff. Emma Thompson's fingers flew across her laptop keyboard. She'd come to Miami to write a puff piece about luxury airport lounges for a travel magazine, but this was turning into something much more significant. She glanced around, noting the other passengers' reactions. Some looked uncomfortable but remained silent. Others seemed to be deliberately ignoring the situation. Only the young woman in the corner appeared to be taking notes as if this were some kind of academic exercise. Perhaps Carlos suggested, his voice tight with suppressed frustration. You might prefer to wait for boarding in one of our private suites. I can arrange for a dedicated attendant, and I'm not hiding in a suite because you can't maintain proper standards in your common areas, Victoria declared. I want to know exactly who has access to first-class seating on my flight. I have a right to know what kind of elements I'll be traveling with. The words hung in the air like a slap. David Peterson closed his laptop with more force than necessary and stood up, his jaw tight. Emma looked up from her typing, her eyes blazing. Even the elderly couple sharing afternoon tea near the window were staring now, their whispered conversation forgotten. Jasmine set down her pen and regarded Victoria with the kind of cool assessment that might have unnerved someone who was paying attention. But Victoria was too caught up in her own performance to notice. Text to Dad. Escalation confirmed. Subject now making explicit discriminatory statements in public. Recommend full documentation protocol. Response from Damon. Are you prepared for the complete lesson? Once we start, we see it through to the end. Reply. Ready when you are, Dad. She's creating exactly the training scenario we discussed. At the concierge desk, Victoria was reaching into her Hermes bag and pulling out her phone. Perhaps I need to call your corporate office directly. I'm sure they'll be very interested to learn about the kind of clientele being admitted to their premium facilities. Carlos realized he was trapped between the rock of company policy and the hard place of an influential customer who clearly had no intention of backing down. He glanced around the lounge, hoping for some kind of inspiration, and caught sight of Jasmine watching the exchange with an expression of detached interest, as if she were studying a fascinating but predictable social phenomenon. Mrs. Whitmore. He tried one more time. I assure you that every guest in our lounge has earned their access through our standard membership criteria. Perhaps if you could specify your exact concerns. My exact concerns, Victoria said slowly, her voice gaining volume and venom, are that I'm paying premium prices to be surrounded by people who understand quality discretion and proper behavior, not scholarship students and diversity hires who think a designer hoodie makes them fit in. The silence that followed was deafening. Emma's typing had stopped entirely. David was standing now, his hands clenched at his sides. The elderly couple looked horrified, and in her corner, Jasmine calmly reached for her phone again. Text to Dad. She just referred to other passengers as diversity hires and scholarship students. Full discrimination protocol is now active. Standing by for your authorization. Response from Damon, authorization granted. Let's see how far she's willing to dig this hole. Carlos looked helplessly around the lounge, finally understanding that he was witnessing something much larger than a simple customer service challenge. This was about to become a defining moment for everyone involved, though he had no idea just how defining it would turn out to be. Victoria, oblivious to the shift in the room's atmosphere, smiled with satisfaction. Now then, she said, her voice returning to its artificially sweet tone. Let's discuss my seating arrangement. I want a complete passenger manifest for first class, and I want any questionable bookings investigated before we board. Behind her designer sunglasses, Emma Thompson started a new document on her laptop. This wasn't going to be a travel article anymore. This was going to be a story about the moment privilege met its match at 37,000 feet. And in her corner, Jasmine Brooks quietly closed her book and began preparing for the most important customer service assessment of her young career. Carlos, I want to speak with your manager. Immediately. Victoria's voice had taken on the particular tone that wealthy people used when they wanted to remind everyone around them exactly how much money was at stake in keeping them happy. She tapped her manicured nail against the desk's surface with increasing speed, a sure sign that her patience was wearing dangerously thin. Mrs. Whitmore. I am the lounge manager, Carlos replied, maintaining his professional composure despite the growing knot in his stomach. Perhaps I can help resolve whatever concerns you. Then get me your supervisor, the regional manager, someone with actual authority. Victoria's eyes swept the lounge like a queen surveying her domain. I pay more for a single round-trip ticket than most people make in 3 months. That should count for something in terms of service quality. At her table by the window, Emma Thompson discreetly adjusted her phone's position. She'd switched from typing notes to recording video, though she kept the camera angle focused on her laptop screen to avoid drawing attention. 3 years of freelance journalism had taught her to recognize when a situation was about to explode into something newsworthy. Ma'am, Carlos tried again. If you could help me understand your specific concerns about your seating arrangement, I'm sure we can. My specific concern. Victoria interrupted, her voice rising enough that the couple at the champagne bar turned to stare. Is that I'm seeing people in this lounge who clearly don't meet the financial requirements for Crown Elite membership. And if they're in here using some kind of staff privileges or diversity programs, I want to know what other accommodations are being made on my flight. David Peterson looked up from his laptop, his expression darkening. As a senior executive at a tech company that prided itself on inclusion initiatives, he recognized the coded language Victoria was using. She wasn't just complaining about service, she was making assumptions about people based on their appearance and expressing those assumptions in increasingly ugly terms. In her corner, Jasmine appeared completely absorbed in her book, but she was actually listening to every word while composing careful observations on her phone. Her father had taught her that the most valuable business intelligence often came from watching how people behaved when they thought no one important was watching. Note: subject escalating from implicit bias to explicit discriminatory language. Clear pattern of economic elitism combined with racial profiling. Staff member caught between policy compliance and customer appeasement. Classic service industry dilemma. Text to Dad. She's demanding to see passenger manifests and questioning other guests' right to be here. Should I maintain cover? Response from Damon. Yes. Let her reveal the full scope of her character. Sometimes people need to see the complete picture to understand why change is necessary. Victoria pulled out her phone and began scrolling through her contacts. Richard, she said when someone answered, her voice carrying clearly across the now quiet lounge. Yes, darling, I'm at Miami International and I'm having issues with the service staff. No, they're being completely unreasonable about a simple request for passenger information. Carlos felt his pulse quicken. He'd been trained to handle difficult customers, but he'd never encountered someone who seemed determined to create problems where none existed. Worse, he was starting to realize that Victoria wasn't just entitled, she was actively looking for reasons to complain about other passengers. Mrs. Whitmore, he said, trying to regain control of the situation. I understand your desire for information, but our privacy policies exist to protect all passengers, including yourself. If someone were to request details about your booking, I'm sure you'd appreciate that confidentiality being maintained." Victoria waved dismissively at Carlos while continuing her phone conversation. "Richard, listen to me. I'm sitting in a supposedly exclusive lounge, and there are people here who clearly don't belong. I'm talking about obvious diversity placements and staff family members taking up space that paying customers should have access to." The words hit the lounge like a cold wind. The elderly couple by the window looked genuinely shocked. David Peterson closed his laptop entirely and stood up, his corporate training warring with his personal sense of right and wrong. Even the bartender had stopped polishing glasses and was staring at Victoria with undisguised disapproval. Emma Thompson's recording captured Victoria's words clearly, along with the reaction of everyone around her. She'd covered enough stories about discrimination to know that this was about to become much bigger than a simple customer service complaint. "Yes," Victoria continued, oblivious to the effect her words were having on the room, "I want you to call whoever you know at Pinnacle Airways Corporate. These lounge managers clearly don't understand that exclusivity means something." "No, I'm not being unreasonable. I'm being a customer who pays for premium service and expects premium company." Jasmine looked up from her book for the first time since Victoria's phone call began. Their eyes met across the lounge for just a moment, Victoria's filled with entitlement and superiority, Jasmine's calm and assessing. Then Jasmine returned to her reading, but not before making another note on her phone. Observation. Subject now involving external pressure from husband's connections to intimidate staff and bypass policy. Clear escalation pattern. Recommend immediate intervention before boarding begins. Text to dad. She's calling in favors to pressure staff. This is going exactly as we discussed in our training scenarios. Response from Damon Perfect. Real-world training is always more valuable than simulations. Continue observation. Victoria ended her phone call and turned back to Carlos with a satisfied smile. "My husband is contacting his associates at Pinnacle Airways Corporate. I expect this situation to be resolved very quickly." She gestured vaguely toward Jasmine's corner. "Starting with a review of how lounge access is being granted to people who clearly can't afford it legitimately." Carlos felt trapped. His training told him to de-escalate and accommodate, but his conscience was screaming that what Victoria was demanding was not just wrong, it was discriminatory in the most blatant possible way. "Mrs. Whitmore," he said carefully, "I want to ensure you have the best possible travel experience. However, I cannot and will not question other guests' right to be here based on their appearance or your assumptions about their financial status." Victoria's face flushed red. Assumptions. Look around, Carlos. Use your eyes. Do you really think that girl in the corner paying for Crown Elite membership out of her own pocket? Please. The lounge had gone completely silent now. Every conversation had stopped, every newspaper had been lowered, every laptop closed. All eyes were on Victoria, though she seemed to interpret this attention as validation rather than horror. David Peterson finally reached his breaking point. He approached the concierge desk, his expression grim. "Excuse me," he said, his voice loud enough for everyone to hear, "but I'm finding it difficult to enjoy my pre-flight experience while listening to someone question other passengers' right to exist in the same space." Victoria turned to face him, her expression shifting from surprise to indignation. "And you are someone who believes that Crown Elite membership should be about service quality, not about excluding people based on how they look or what you think they can afford." "Oh, please," Victoria scoffed. "Don't lecture me about inclusion and diversity. I've heard it all before. Some of us still believe that exclusive means exclusive." Emma Thompson stood up from her table, her phone now openly recording Mrs. Whitmore. "I'm a travel journalist, and I have to ask, are you comfortable with your comments being part of the public record?" Victoria barely glanced at Emma. "Absolutely. I'm not ashamed of believing that premium services should be reserved for premium customers. If that makes me the villain in someone's diversity story, so be it. And in her corner, Jasmine Brooks made one final note before closing her book and preparing for boarding. Subject has now made discriminatory statements on camera and indicated willingness to have those statements publicized. Full documentation complete. Ready to proceed to next phase. The boarding announcement for Flight 428 to London echoed through the lounge, but nobody moved immediately. The tension in the air was too thick, the battle lines too clearly drawn. Everyone could sense that something significant was about to happen, though none of them could have imagined just how significant it would turn out to be. Attention passengers. We are now beginning pre-boarding for Flight 428 to London Heathrow. We invite our Diamond Elite members and passengers requiring special assistance to board at this time. The announcement crackled through the Crown Lounge speakers, but the usual bustle of passengers gathering their belongings was notably subdued. The confrontation at the concierge desk had created an atmosphere of anticipation that no one seemed eager to break. Victoria Whitmore was the first to move naturally. She swept past Carlos without another word, her Hermes bag clutched like a weapon and her heels clicking against the marble floor with military precision. Finally, she announced to no one in particular, "I need to speak with the crew about passenger security protocols." David Peterson shook his head and began packing his laptop. "This should be interesting," he muttered loud enough for Emma Thompson to hear. Emma was already slinging her camera bag over her shoulder. "I've covered a lot of travel stories," she said, keeping her voice low, "but I've never seen anything quite like this. She's going to get on that plane and continue this performance. Someone should warn that girl." David glanced toward Jasmine's corner. She has no idea what she's walking into. But Jasmine was already standing calmly shouldering her backpack and checking her phone one final time. To everyone watching, she looked like any other young passenger. Maybe a little nervous about the flight ahead, certainly outclassed by the luxury around her. What they couldn't see was the message thread between her and her father, or the way her fingers moved with practiced efficiency across the screen. Text to Dad. Boarding commencing. Subject has made discriminatory statements on record and indicated intent to continue on aircraft. Recommend full protocol activation. Response from Damon crew has been briefed to observe but not intervene unless safety becomes an issue. Captain Riley is aware this is a customer experience assessment. Your call on timing. Reply understood. Maintaining cover through initial confrontation phase. Carlos watched the passengers file out of the lounge with a growing sense of dread. He'd called his supervisor about Victoria's behavior, but he'd been told to accommodate the customer within reason and avoid any incidents that might reflect poorly on the airline. He had a sinking feeling that avoiding incidents was about to become impossible. The jet bridge buzzed with the usual pre-flight energy as passengers queued according to their boarding groups. Victoria, of course, had pushed her way to the very front of the line despite the fact that Diamond Elite boarding was supposed to be orderly and dignified. She tapped her foot impatiently while the gate agents checked boarding passes and processed the few passengers ahead of her. "First class seat 2B, she announced when she reached the podium, as if the agent might not be able to read her boarding pass. "I need to speak with the flight crew immediately about passenger screening procedures." The gate agent, a young woman named Maria who'd been working for Pinnacle Airways for 2 years, smiled professionally. "Of course, Mrs. Whitmore. The crew will be happy to assist you once you're seated. Enjoy your flight." Victoria didn't move. "You don't understand. I need to speak with them before other passengers board. There's been a security issue in the lounge." Maria's smile faltered slightly. "A security issue? Should I contact—" No. Victoria waved impatiently. "Not that kind of security. I mean passenger vetting. People boarding with tickets they can't possibly afford legitimately." Behind Victoria, the line was backing up. Passengers were checking their phones and looking annoyed. David Peterson, who was 3 people back, caught Emma Thompson's eye and shook his head in disbelief. "Ma'am," Maria said carefully, "if you have concerns about another passenger, I can arrange for you to speak with. Just let me on the plane. Victoria snapped. "I'll handle this myself." She marched down the jet bridge like a woman on a mission, her heels echoing off the walls. Behind her, the other first-class passengers followed at a more measured pace, though several were already pulling out their phones. Jasmine waited until the initial rush had died down before approaching the gate. She moved with the kind of calm confidence that comes from knowing exactly where you belong and why you're there, though. To casual observers, she simply looked like a young woman trying not to be intimidated by the luxury travel experience. "Boarding pass?" Maria asked, and Jasmine handed over her phone with the mobile pass displayed. "Seat 1A. Thank you." Maria's eyes widened slightly as she scanned the barcode. Seat 1A was the flagship suite, the most expensive seat on the aircraft. She looked up at Jasmine, taking in the faded hoodie, the worn jeans, the complete absence of typical first-class passenger indicators, and then back at her screen. "Is everything okay?" Jasmine asked politely. "Oh yes, everything's fine," Maria said quickly, though she made a note to watch this interaction play out. Something told her this flight was going to be memorable. "Enjoy your flight, Miss Brooks." The first-class cabin of Pinnacle Airways Flight 428 was a masterpiece of modern aviation luxury. 12 private suites arranged in a 1-1-1 configuration, each with sliding doors for complete privacy, lie flat beds, 32-inch 4K entertainment screens, and amenities that rivaled high-end hotels. The lighting was soft and warm, designed to reduce travel stress and create an atmosphere of exclusive comfort. Victoria was already in her seat 2B, but she wasn't settling in. Instead, she was standing in the aisle, gesticulating emphatically at Sofia Valencia, the lead flight attendant. Sofia had been with Pinnacle Airways for 8 years and had dealt with every type of difficult passenger imaginable, but something about this conversation was setting off alarm bells in her head. "What I'm telling you," Victoria was saying, her voice carrying clearly through the cabin, "is that there's been some kind of booking error. Or fraud. I don't know how else to explain it." Sofia maintained her professional smile, though her eyes were alert. "Mrs. Whitmore, if you suspect fraudulent activity, I'll need to file a report with our security team. Can you be more specific about your concerns?" The girl who was in the lounge, young black, dressed like she's heading to a gymnasium. She's supposedly booked in seat 1A, but that's impossible. Sofia felt her stomach clench. In 8 years of flying, she'd learned to recognize discrimination disguised as security concerns. "Ma'am, all passengers have been properly screened through our booking system. If someone has a boarding pass for seat 1A, then your system has been compromised," Victoria interrupted. "Look, I'm not trying to cause trouble. I'm trying to prevent an embarrassing situation for your airline when it comes out that someone hacked your reservation system or is using stolen credit cards." Other passengers were starting to board now, filtering into the first-class cabin with the quiet efficiency of people accustomed to luxury travel. David Peterson appeared, took one look at the scene unfolding near seat 2B, and shook his head. He'd hoped the drama would stay in the lounge. Emma Thompson boarded next, her journalist instincts immediately homing in on the conversation between Victoria and Sofia. She found her seat 4F and began setting up her equipment ostensibly to document her luxury travel experience, but really to capture whatever was about to unfold. "Mrs. Whitmore." Sofia said, her voice maintaining its professional calm despite her growing unease. "I understand you have concerns, but I cannot investigate another passenger's booking without specific evidence of wrongdoing. If you'd like to file a formal complaint—" "I don't want to file a complaint," Victoria said, her voice rising. "I want you to verify that girl's ticket before she sits down in a seat that costs $12,000. The cabin went quiet. The few passengers who had boarded were now openly staring. Even the cabin crew were exchanging worried glances. This was the kind of situation that could escalate quickly and end up on social media within hours. And then Jasmine appeared. She stepped into the first-class cabin with her backpack over one shoulder and her boarding pass in her hand, completely unaware that she was walking into the middle of a brewing storm. The contrast was immediate and stark. Victoria, in her designer armor, standing in the aisle like an avenging angel of exclusivity, and Jasmine in her college student uniform, looking around for her seat with the kind of wide-eyed appreciation that suggested she'd never flown first class before. Victoria spotted her immediately. "There," she said, pointing with barely contained triumph. "That's exactly what I'm talking about." Jasmine paused, following Victoria's gesture and realizing that somehow she'd become the center of attention in a cabin full of strangers. Her training kicked in observe, assess, respond strategically, though she maintained the slightly confused expression of someone who had no idea what was happening. "Excuse me," Jasmine said politely, looking between Victoria and Sophia. "Is there a problem?" Victoria stepped forward, her expression a mixture of vindication and barely controlled outrage. "Yes, there's a problem. You're in the wrong cabin." Jasmine glanced down at her boarding pass, then at the seat numbers visible on the suites around her. "I'm looking for seat 1A. "Exactly my point," Victoria announced to the cabin at large. "Look at her. Look at this situation. Does anyone really believe that girl paid $12,000 for a first-class ticket to London?" The silence that followed was devastating. It wasn't the quiet of a luxury cabin settling in for departure. It was the silence of people witnessing something they knew was wrong but weren't sure how to address. Emma Thompson's finger hovered over her phone's record button. David Peterson looked like he was fighting an internal battle between intervention and self-preservation. Jasmine stood in the center of it all, her expression carefully neutral, though anyone who knew her well would have recognized the subtle signs of her analytical mind shifting into high gear. This was it, the moment her father had prepared her for. The test that would determine not just her own character, but the character of everyone around her. "Ma'am," she said calmly, addressing Victoria directly, "I have a confirmed reservation for seat 1A. Is there some reason you think I shouldn't be here?" Victoria laughed, but there was nothing pleasant about the sound. Besides the obvious. Besides the fact that you look like you've never seen the inside of a first-class cabin before, let alone paid for one. "Sophia?" Valencia felt the situation slipping out of control. Her training told her to de-escalate, but her conscience was telling her that what she was witnessing was discrimination pure and simple. She looked at Jasmine. Young, composed, clearly. Uncomfortable, but handling herself with remarkable grace, and made a decision that would define the rest of the flight. Mrs. Whitmore Sophia said firmly, "I need you to return to your seat. All passengers have been properly screened and their reservations confirmed. There is no security issue here. No security issue." Victoria's voice rose to a pitch that made several passengers wince. "Look around, Sophia. Use your eyes. That girl doesn't belong here any more than I belong in coach." And that's when Jasmine Brooks made her first strategic decision. Instead of revealing her identity, instead of ending the confrontation with a simple phone call to her father, she looked Victoria in the eye and said the words that would set the tone for everything that followed. "You're absolutely right about one thing, ma'am. One of us definitely doesn't belong here." The words hung in the air like a challenge, and Victoria Whitmore's face went through several shades of red before settling on a mottled crimson that clashed spectacularly with her carefully applied makeup. "Did you just—" Victoria sputtered, her voice climbing to a pitch that made the crystal champagne flutes ring sympathetically. "Did this child just threaten me?" Jasmine remained perfectly still, her backpack still slung over one shoulder, her expression calm and composed. "I didn't threaten anyone, ma'am. I simply agreed with your observation that one of us doesn't belong here. I guess we'll see which one it is." Emma Thompson's finger finally found the record button on her phone. She'd covered enough stories to know when she was witnessing something that would matter beyond the immediate moment, and every instinct she'd developed over 3 years of freelance journalism was screaming that this was going to be significant. Mrs. Whitmore Sophia Valencia interjected, her voice carrying the kind of firm authority that comes from years of managing difficult situations at 37,000 feet. "I really must insist that you take your seat." We have other passengers boarding and other passengers. Victoria interrupted, wheeling around to face Sophia with renewed fury. Yes, let's talk about that. How many other passengers on this flight received their tickets through diversity programs or employee discounts? How many are actually paying the full fare? David Peterson, who had been trying to mind his own business while unpacking his laptop, finally looked up. Ma'am, I couldn't help but overhear. And I have to say— You have to say what? Victoria snapped, her attention shifting to him like a heat-seeking missile. That you support fraud in the name of inclusion. That airlines should give away premium seats to people who can't afford them just to make some kind of social statement. I have to say that you're making assumptions about a fellow passenger based on nothing more than her appearance, David replied steadily, his corporate training and conflict resolution warring with his personal desire to tell Victoria exactly what he thought of her behavior. And frankly, those assumptions say more about your character than hers. Victoria's laugh was sharp and bitter. My character? I'm a paying customer who expects a certain level of quality from a premium service. That includes the clientele. The word clientele dripped with enough venom to kill a small animal. Several passengers who had been trying to ignore the confrontation now looked up from their phones and tablets, their expressions ranging from uncomfortable to openly disgusted. Jasmine maintained her position in the center of the aisle, but she pulled out her phone and began typing. To any observer, it looked like she might be texting friends about the crazy woman she'd encountered on her flight. In reality, she was documenting every word for the customer service assessment that this had become. Note: Subject escalating to direct accusations of fraud and questioning other passengers' right to service based on appearance. Clear pattern of discriminatory behavior. Crew member attempting de-escalation but customer resistant to reasonable intervention. Text to Dad. She's now involving other passengers and making company-wide accusations about discriminatory ticket distribution. Should I maintain position or de-escalate? Response from Damon: maintain position. We need to see the full scope of how our staff handles this kind of discrimination. Captain Riley is monitoring but letting crew manage for now. Excuse me, miss. Victoria's voice cut through Jasmine's texting, and she looked up to find Victoria standing directly in front of her, close enough that Jasmine could smell the expensive perfume and see the carefully concealed lines around her eyes. I asked you a question earlier. How exactly did you pay for this ticket? Jasmine blinked slowly, her expression remaining neutral. I'm sorry, but I don't think that's any of your business. It's everyone's business when fraud is involved, Victoria shot back. I've been flying first class for 15 years and I know the demographic. Young girls in hoodies don't spend $12,000 on airline tickets. So either you're flying on someone else's dime or you found a way to game the system. Sophia Valencia felt sweat forming under her uniform collar. This was rapidly approaching the point where she would need to call the captain, and she knew from experience that captain involvement usually meant someone was getting removed from the aircraft. The problem was she wasn't entirely sure who would be doing the removing. Mrs. Whitmore. She tried again. I really cannot allow you to interrogate another passenger about their personal finances. If you have genuine security concerns, I can arrange. Security concerns. Victoria whirled around again, her movement so sudden that her designer handbag swung out and nearly clipped Jasmine in the shoulder. Yes, I have security concerns. I have concerns about how your airline verifies passenger identity and payment methods. I have concerns about who's allowed in crown lounges and first-class cabins. Her voice was rising with each word, and passengers throughout the cabin were now openly staring. The boarding process had slowed to a crawl as people lingered in the aisle, sensing drama unfolding. Emma Thompson adjusted her phone's angle to better capture the scene while pretending to check her social media. Her followers were going to lose their minds when she posted this footage. She could already see the headlines, entitled, "Karen Melts Down Over Young Black Woman in First Class." Let me ask everyone here a simple question, Victoria announced, turning to address the cabin at large like she was holding a town hall meeting. Look at this situation. Look at her, she gestured at Jasmine, and tell me if you honestly believe she paid for that seat with her own money. The request hung in the air like a toxic cloud. Several passengers shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Others pulled out their phones, some to record, others to text friends about the unbelievable scene they were witnessing. David Peterson stood up. "Ma'am, what I believe is that you've crossed several lines of common decency." And common decency? Victoria's voice hit a note that probably scared small children in nearby airport terminals. What about the common decency of honest passengers not having to subsidize someone else's vacation through diversity quotas and charity tickets? That's when the first passenger decided they'd heard enough. An elderly gentleman in seat 3A, Marcus Wellington, according to his luggage tag, cleared his throat loudly. "Young lady," he said, his voice carrying the authority of 8 decades of refusing to tolerate nonsense. "I don't know what's gotten into you, but you're making a spectacle of yourself and embarrassing everyone within earshot." Victoria spun around to face him. "I'm making a spectacle. I'm not the one pretending to belong somewhere. I clearly don't fit." "No," Marcus replied calmly. "You're just the one assuming that belonging is determined by skin color and clothing choices. In my day, we called that prejudice." The word prejudice hit the cabin like a lightning bolt. Several passengers gasped audibly. Emma Thompson's livestream viewer count, which she had started as an afterthought, suddenly jumped from 12 viewers to over 200. Jasmine watched the exchange with the detached fascination of an anthropologist studying human behavior. Every word, every reaction, every choice made by passengers and crew was providing valuable data about how Pinnacle Airways handled discrimination incidents. Her father had been right. Sometimes the most valuable lessons came from letting people reveal their true character under pressure. Note: multiple passengers now engaged. Elderly passenger defending target of discrimination. Subject becoming increasingly aggressive and explicitly discriminatory. Recommend immediate intervention if escalation continues. Victoria, apparently realizing that the room was turning against her, decided to double down rather than retreat. "Fine," she announced, her voice dripping with contempt. "If everyone wants to pretend this is normal, if everyone wants to ignore the obvious fraud happening right in front of us, then I'll handle this myself." She pulled out her phone and began dialing. "Richard." "Yes, it's me. I need you to call your contact at Pinnacle Airways Corporate immediately. We have a situation." The conversation that followed was loud enough for half the cabin to hear, and every word made the situation worse. "I'm telling you, this is clearly some kind of diversity program gone wrong. No, I'm not being dramatic. There's a girl here who looks like she should be cleaning the cabin, not flying in it." "Yes," I said, "cleaning. Look at her." The sharp intake of breath from multiple passengers was audible. Even some of the flight crew who had been trained to remain neutral in passenger disputes were now staring at Victoria with undisguised shock. Sofia Valencia looked around the cabin, taking in the faces of passengers who had paid thousands of dollars for a luxury travel experience and were instead getting a front-row seat to what appeared to be a textbook case of racial discrimination. She made a decision. "Mrs. Whitmore," she said, her voice carrying a new edge of authority, "I need you to end that phone call and take your seat immediately." "I will not," Victoria replied, not bothering to cover the phone. "Richard, tell them I pay $15,000 for these tickets, and I expect a certain standard of passenger." She paused, listened to whatever her husband was saying, and her expression shifted from righteous indignation to genuine anger. "What do you mean, be careful? What do you mean things are being recorded? I don't care who's recording. I'm being defrauded by an airline that's giving away seats to people who don't belong in, ma'am." The voice was calm, quiet, and carried an unmistakable note of authority that cut through Victoria's tirade like a blade through silk. Everyone in the cabin turned to look at Jasmine, who had spoken for the first time since her initial response to Victoria's accusations. Ma'am Jasmine repeated, her voice still calm, but now carrying something that made several passengers sit up straighter. I think you've said enough. Victoria stared at her, momentarily speechless at being interrupted by someone she considered so far beneath her notice. Actually, Jasmine continued, pulling out her phone again, I think you've said exactly enough. Thank you for the demonstration. And she began typing again, her fingers moving with practiced efficiency across the screen, documenting every word of Victoria's meltdown for a report that would soon change both their lives in ways neither of them could possibly imagine. Victoria stared at Jasmine's phone, as if it were a weapon aimed directly at her perfectly maintained facade. Demonstration? What demonstration? What are you writing? But Jasmine didn't answer immediately. She was too busy composing what would become the most consequential text message in Pinnacle Airways corporate history. Text to Dad. Full discrimination incident captured. Subject has made explicit racial statements, questioned passenger verification protocols company-wide, and refused multiple de-escalation attempts by crew. Recommend immediate corporate intervention authorization. Response from Damon Jasmine. I've been watching the live stream that started from your flight. We're approaching 50,000 viewers across multiple platforms. Are you prepared for the complete protocol? Reply. Ready to proceed. She's given us everything we need for comprehensive policy review. Victoria snatched the phone away from her ear, though her husband's voice was still audible through the speaker. Richard, I'll call you back. This situation is getting completely out of hand. She snapped the phone shut and advanced on Jasmine, her designer heels clicking ominously against the cabin floor. I asked you a question, young lady. What are you writing about me? Jasmine looked up from her phone with an expression of mild curiosity, as if Victoria were an interesting but ultimately insignificant phenomenon. I'm taking notes on customer behavior patterns for a service quality assessment. This has been very educational. Service quality assessment. Victoria's voice pitched higher. Who do you think you are? Some kind of undercover inspector? Please, you're probably posting on social media about how you scammed your way into first class. Emma Thompson, whose own social media was exploding with reactions to her live coverage, looked up from her phone. Actually, ma'am, from what I can see, you're the only one here who's creating content worth posting. Victoria spun around to face Emma. Are you recording this? I'm a travel journalist documenting my flight experience, Emma replied calmly. Though I have to say, this isn't the kind of first-class service story I was planning to write. Turn it off, Victoria demanded. Turn it off right now. I don't consent to being recorded. Ma'am David Peterson interjected, standing up from his seat with his laptop still balanced in his hands. You're in a public space, speaking loudly enough for everyone to hear. I don't think consent is really the issue here. Victoria whirled around to face him, her movements becoming increasingly erratic as she realized that every person in the cabin was now either recording her defending Jasmine or both. This is a conspiracy, she announced to the cabin at large. You're all working together to make me look unreasonable for expecting basic standards. Marcus Wellington, the elderly gentleman in seat 3A, chuckled dryly. My dear woman, you don't need our help to look unreasonable. You're managing that quite well on your own. The comment drew nervous laughter from several passengers, which seemed to push Victoria even further over the edge. She pulled out her phone again and began dialing frantically. I'm calling corporate headquarters directly, she announced. We'll see how funny this is when I'm speaking to the CEO himself. Sofia Valencia exchanged glances with the other flight attendants. This situation had progressed far beyond anything in their training manuals, and she was beginning to wonder if they would actually make it to London without someone being removed from the aircraft. Mrs. Whitmore. She tried one more time, perhaps. If you could just take your seat, we can. My seat. Victoria's laugh was sharp enough to cut glass. I'm not sitting down until this fraud is exposed and removed from the aircraft. Hello? Yes, I need to speak to someone in executive customer relations at Pinnacle Airways. No, I won't hold. This is an emergency. While Victoria berated whoever had answered her call, Jasmine continued her documentation, though now she was also coordinating with her father's executive team. Text chain with Corporate Communications Director Elena Martinez. Jasmine, we're monitoring multiple social media streams from your flight. Current viewer count across platforms exceeding 75,000 and climbing. Legal wants to know if we're proceeding with full disclosure protocol. Jasmine's subject has now made explicit threats about exposing fraud and contacted corporate directly. She's demanding CEO intervention. Perfect setup for reveal. Elena. Your father is in the boardroom with senior staff. We're ready to coordinate response the moment you give authorization. Jasmine. Stand by. She's not done digging yet. Victoria's phone conversation was growing louder and more aggressive by the moment. I don't care if the CEO is in a meeting. I pay more for a single ticket than most people make in a month, and I'm being subjected to fraudulent passengers and incompetent crew. Yes, fraudulent. Look at her. Does she look like she belongs in first class? Emma Thompson's live stream had now been picked up by several major social media accounts, and the comments were pouring in faster than she could read them. Pinnacle Air. Karen was already trending, and videos from the lounge incident were being shared thousands of times per minute. Emma's stream comments. OMG, this woman is insane. That poor girl just trying to get to her seat. Someone needs to stop this. This is why I fly. Southwest. Call the CEO. Karen David Peterson, who had been silently composing his own social media post about the incident, finally published it to his LinkedIn account where his 15,000 followers included several senior executives from major corporations. LinkedIn post. David Peterson, Senior Director. Tech Innovation Corp. Currently witnessing the most blatant display of racial discrimination I've ever seen on a commercial aircraft. Passenger interrogating young black woman about how she really paid for her first-class ticket. This is 2024, people. Do better. #dignity, #inclusion, #pinnacle. Air. The post began gaining traction immediately, with comments and shares multiplying by the minute. Meanwhile, Victoria had apparently been transferred to someone higher up the corporate chain because her demeanor suddenly shifted from demanding to triumphant. Yes, thank you for taking my call personally. I've been a Diamond Elite member for 8 years, and my husband Richard Whitmore has significant business relationships with airport properties. Yes, that. Richard Whitmore. Now let me explain what's happening on Flight 428. Jasmine watched Victoria's performance with the kind of fascination usually reserved for nature documentaries about predators who didn't realize they were being hunted. Every word Victoria spoke was being recorded not just by passengers, but by the aircraft's internal communication system, which automatically logged calls made to corporate headquarters for quality assurance purposes. I'm telling you, Victoria continued, her voice carrying clearly through the cabin, this is exactly the kind of situation that damages premium brand reputation. When paying customers can't trust that their fellow passengers have legitimately earned their seats. She paused, listening to whoever was on the other end of the line, and her expression shifted from confident to confused to slightly worried. What do you mean be very careful about accusations? I'm not making accusations, I'm reporting obvious fraud. No, I don't have specific evidence of credit card fraud. But look at the situation. What passenger manifest? Why would I need to see? Hello? Hello? Victoria stared at her phone in disbelief. They hung up on me. They actually hung up on me. Sophia Valencia, who had been listening to the entire conversation with growing alarm, felt a knot forming in her stomach. In 8 years of flying, she'd never heard a passenger make that kind of demand to corporate headquarters, and she'd certainly never heard of corporate hanging up on a Diamond Elite member, Mrs. Whitmore, she said carefully. Perhaps we should. Perhaps we should. What Victoria's composure was beginning to crack in earnest now. Perhaps we should pretend that airlines giving away premium seats to people who can't afford them is normal. Perhaps we should ignore the fact that I'm being forced to subsidize someone else's vacation through my ticket price. Marcus. Wellington cleared his throat again. Young lady, I've been flying first class since before you were born, and I can assure you that how someone pays for their ticket is between them and the airline. Your concerns are inappropriate and frankly embarrassing. Embarrassing? Victoria's voice hit a pitch that probably registered on seismographs in nearby states. What's embarrassing is watching an airline compromise its standards for the sake of political correctness. That's when Captain James Riley's voice crackled over the cabin intercom system. Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain speaking. We're currently experiencing a slight delay in our departure while we address some passenger concerns. We appreciate your patience and expect to be underway shortly. The announcement was routine, but passengers familiar with airline protocols recognized it as a warning that something significant was happening. Delays for passenger concerns usually meant someone was about to be removed from the aircraft. Victoria apparently recognized this as well because she suddenly became even more agitated. "They're going to try to remove me," she announced to the cabin. "They're going to remove the paying customer to protect their diversity program." Jasmine finally looked up from her phone, and for the first time since the confrontation began, she smiled. It wasn't a mocking smile or a triumphant smile. It was the kind of smile someone gives when they realize a long and complex test has finally reached its conclusion, Mrs. Whitmore. She said, her voice carrying a new quality that made several passengers lean forward to listen. "I think you've misunderstood something fundamental about this situation." Victoria stared at her. "What?" "You keep talking about paying customers and people who don't belong here." Jasmine continued, standing up and adjusting her backpack. "But you haven't asked the most important question." "Which is?" Jasmine's smile widened slightly. "Which is what if the person you're trying to remove actually owns the airline?" The silence that followed was so complete that the only sound in the cabin was the gentle hum of the aircraft's ventilation system and the distant rumble of jet engines warming up on nearby runways. Victoria's face went through several colors before settling on a pale gray that matched her expensive handbag. And from somewhere in the cabin, Emma Thompson whispered into her live stream, "Oh my God. Oh my God. I think this is about to get really interesting." The words "owns the airline" hung in the air like a thunderclap, followed by the kind of silence that occurs when an entire group of people suddenly realizes they've been watching the wrong movie. Victoria Whitmore's face went through a fascinating spectrum of colors from pale gray to flushed red to a sickly green that suggested her body was having trouble processing what her ears had just heard. "Owns the airline?" Victoria's voice came out as barely more than a whisper. "What are you talking about?" Jasmine didn't answer immediately. Instead, she pulled out her phone again and showed Victoria the screen. The contact name displayed clearly read, "Dad, CEO, Office Direct." "I think," Jasmine said calmly, "it's time for you to understand exactly who you've been trying to have removed from this aircraft." Victoria stared at the phone screen like it might suddenly reveal itself to be an elaborate hoax. That's impossible. You're just a college student. You're wearing a hoodie." "Yes," Jasmine agreed pleasantly. "I am wearing a hoodie. Harvard Medical, if you look closely. And you're absolutely right that I'm young. 19 to be exact. But what you seem to have missed is that being young and wearing comfortable clothes doesn't actually prevent someone from having a last name like Brooks." The name hit the cabin like a physical blow. Brooks, as in Damon Brooks, founder and CEO of Pinnacle Airways, as in the man whose face appeared on the covers of aviation magazines and business journals around the world, as in the billionaire entrepreneur who had built one of the most successful airlines in aviation history. Emma Thompson's live stream viewership counter was climbing so fast it looked like a broken odometer, 127,000 viewers, and rising. Her comment section had exploded into complete chaos, with people tagging friends, sharing the stream, and demanding updates every few seconds. Brooks. David Peterson looked up from his laptop, his expression shifting from confused to amazed to something approaching awe, as in Damon Brooks. The CEO, Jasmine, nodded. My father, yes. Victoria seemed to be having trouble processing this information. She stood in the center of the aisle, swaying slightly, her designer handbag clutched to her chest like a shield against reality. But you look like... She trailed off, apparently finally realizing that finishing that sentence would only make her situation exponentially worse. Like what Jasmine asked, her voice still perfectly calm, but now carrying an undertone that suggested Victoria should choose her next words very, very carefully. Sofia Valencia felt like she was watching a car accident in slow motion. She'd dealt with difficult passengers before, but she'd never seen someone dig themselves this deep a hole and then keep digging. Her training told her to intervene, but her instincts told her that this situation was now far beyond anything in the flight attendant manual. Mrs. Whitmore. She tried her voice barely above a whisper. Perhaps you'd like to take your seat now. But Victoria was too deep into her meltdown to accept the escape route. This is a setup, she announced to the cabin, her voice rising to a pitch that made several passengers wince. This is all a setup to make me look bad. Marcus Wellington, the elderly gentleman who had been quietly observing the entire debacle, let out a bark of laughter. My dear woman, if this is a setup, then you've been the most cooperative target in history. Emma Thompson was frantically typing updates into her social media accounts, barely able to keep up with the demand for information from her followers. Twitter update, @EmmaTravels Breaking Woman, who demanded young black passenger be removed from first class, just learned the passenger is the daughter of the CEO. This is not a drill. #Pinnacle. Air Karen. #Instant Karma. Retweets. 15,000 and climbing comments. 8,000 likes. 45,000. Victoria pulled out her phone again, her hands shaking so badly she could barely hold it. Richard, we have a problem. A big problem. Her husband's voice was loud enough for nearby passengers to hear through the speaker, and he didn't sound happy. Victoria, what have you done? I just got 3 calls from people at the airport authority saying you're all over social media having some kind of meltdown. It's not a meltdown, Victoria shrieked. I'm being set up. This girl, she's supposedly the CEO's daughter, but that's impossible because she looks like Victoria. Her husband's voice cut through her explanation like a knife. Stop talking, right now. Whatever you're about to say, don't say it. But Victoria was past the point of taking advice. She looks like she should be cleaning the plane, not flying in it, and now she's claiming to be Damon Brooks' daughter. It's ridiculous. The sharp intake of breath from multiple passengers was audible throughout the cabin. Even the flight crew, who had been trained to remain neutral in passenger disputes, were now staring at Victoria with undisguised horror. Jasmine pulled out her phone and calmly hit speed dial. The phone rang once before a familiar voice answered. Hi, Dad. The words carried clearly through the cabin, and everyone heard the warm paternal tone of the response. Hi, sweetheart. How's the customer experience assessment going? Jasmine glanced around the cabin, taking in the faces of shocked passengers, mortified crew members, and one woman who looked like she was about to faint. It's been very educational, she said into the phone. I think we've gathered enough data for a comprehensive training program. Excellent. I've been monitoring the situation through the live streams. Are you ready to conclude the assessment? Victoria, who had been listening to this conversation with growing horror, suddenly lurched forward. Let me talk to him. This is all a misunderstanding. I'm a Diamond Elite member. I've been flying with this airline for 8 years. Jasmine looked at Victoria with the kind of calm assessment that suggested she was studying an interesting but ultimately disappointing laboratory specimen. Dad, Mrs. Whitmore would like to speak with you. Put her on speaker, came the reply, and suddenly the entire cabin could hear the voice of Damon Brooks, one of the most recognizable executives in the aviation industry. Victoria snatched the phone with trembling hands. "Mr. Brooks, sir. This is Victoria Whitmore, Diamond Elite member 4A7B9. There's been a terrible misunderstanding, Mrs." Whitmore came the calm, professional voice of Damon Brooks. "I've been watching the live stream of your interaction with my daughter. Please explain to me exactly what misunderstanding you're referring to." Victoria's mouth opened and closed several times before any sound came out. I didn't know. She doesn't look like what Mrs. Whitmore." The question hung in the air like a sword over Victoria's head. Everyone in the cabin was staring at her, waiting to see if she would actually finish that sentence. "She doesn't look like she belongs in first class," Victoria finally whispered. The silence that followed was deafening. When Damon Brooks spoke again, his voice carried the kind of quiet authority that built billion-dollar companies and changed entire industries. "Mrs. Whitmore, my daughter, has been conducting a customer service assessment for our new Inclusion and Dignity training program. Your behavior today has provided us with an invaluable case study in exactly the kind of discrimination we're working to eliminate from our industry." Victoria's face was now completely white except for two bright red spots on her cheeks. "Sir, I was just trying to ensure the integrity of your premium services. By questioning a 19-year-old passenger about how she really paid for her ticket, by demanding that crew members investigate her based solely on her appearance, by stating on a recorded live stream that she looks like she should be cleaning the plane." Each question hit Victoria like a physical blow. She looked around the cabin desperately, as if searching for allies, but found only faces ranging from disgusted to fascinated to openly contemptuous. Emma Thompson's viewer count had now passed 200,000, and major news outlets were beginning to pick up the story. Her phone was buzzing constantly with interview requests from CNN, Fox News, NBC, and every major aviation publication in the world. "Mr. Brooks." Victoria tried one more time, her voice breaking. "I've been a loyal customer for 8 years. I've spent hundreds of thousands of dollars with your airline." "Yes, Mrs. Whitmore, you have. And as of today, that business relationship is permanently terminated. You are banned from all Pinnacle Airways flights, lounges, and services effective immediately." The words hit the cabin like an explosion. Several passengers gasped audibly. David Peterson actually stood up to get a better view of Victoria's reaction. Even the flight crew seemed stunned by the swift and decisive nature of the punishment. Victoria staggered backward, her designer heels catching on the cabin carpet. "You can't do that. I'm a paying customer. I have rights. You have the right to be treated with dignity and respect." Damon Brooks replied calmly, "And you have forfeited any claim to that same treatment through your behavior toward my daughter and other passengers. Sophia." The flight attendant jumped at hearing her name called. "Yes, sir. Please arrange for Mrs. Whitmore to be removed from the aircraft. Security should be standing by." And Sophia, "Thank you for maintaining your professionalism throughout this incident. We'll be discussing your promotion when you return to Miami." Sophia's eyes filled with tears. In 8 years of flying, she'd never been personally recognized by the CEO, let alone offered a promotion. Victoria looked around the cabin one more time, taking in the faces of passengers who were openly recording her humiliation, crew members who could barely conceal their satisfaction, and most prominently, the young woman in the gray hoodie who had just destroyed her life with calm, methodical precision. "This isn't over," Victoria said, though her voice lacked any real conviction. "My husband has connections. We'll fight this." Jasmine, who had been quietly observing the final stages of Victoria's meltdown, finally spoke again. "Mrs. Whitmore, I think you should know something else." Victoria turned to look at her desperation clear in her eyes. "This entire incident is now part of our customer service training database. Your behavior will be used to teach airline staff worldwide how to recognize and respond to discrimination. thousands of employees will watch your performance as an example of exactly what not to tolerate from passengers. Victoria's remaining composure finally, completely, utterly collapsed. She began sobbing, not the elegant tears of a sophisticated woman, but the messy, desperate crying of someone who had just realized the true scope of their catastrophic error in judgment. Through the cabin windows, passengers could see airport security approaching the aircraft. The reckoning was no longer coming. It had arrived. Airport security appeared at the aircraft door like harbingers of consequence, their uniforms crisp and their expressions professionally neutral. The lead officer, a woman named Sergeant Martinez, who had been dealing with difficult airline passengers for 12 years, stepped into the first-class cabin and immediately assessed the situation. One woman sobbing hysterically while clutching a designer handbag. One young passenger sitting calmly in her seat looking like she'd just finished a particularly interesting homework assignment. 12 other passengers with their phones out recording everything. And a flight crew that looked like they'd just witnessed something they'd be talking about for the rest of their careers. Mrs. Whitmore, Sergeant Martinez's voice cut through Victoria's sobs like a professional blade. "I'm going to need you to gather your belongings and come with us." Victoria looked up from her hands, mascara streaking down her cheeks in dark rivers. "Please, you don't understand. I made a mistake. I didn't know who she was. I'm not a racist person, I just—" "Ma'am," Sergeant Martinez interrupted gently but firmly, "I'm not here to discuss the incident. I'm here to escort you off the aircraft per the airline's request." Emma Thompson was frantically updating her social media followers, barely able to keep up with the explosive growth in engagement across all platforms. Instagram Live update: security is here to remove her. She's crying and saying she didn't know who the girl was, as if that somehow makes her behavior okay. Current viewer count 267,000 and climbing. This is the most insane thing I've ever witnessed. Comments were pouring in faster than Emma could read them. This is instant karma at its finest. She ruined her own life in real time. That girl in the hoodie is my hero. How do you not recognize your own airline's CEO daughter? This woman literally destroyed herself on camera. David Peterson was composing what would become one of the most shared LinkedIn posts in corporate history. I just witnessed the most extraordinary example of how prejudice can destroy someone's life in real time. A passenger on my flight spent an hour harassing a young black woman, demanding she be removed from first class because she looked like she didn't belong there. That young woman turned out to be the daughter of the airline's CEO. The prejudiced passenger has been banned for life and escorted off by security. This is what accountability looks like. Character is revealed under pressure. #leadership, #accountability, #justice, #pinnacle air. Meanwhile, Jasmine was having her own text conversation with her father's executive team, coordinating the corporate response that would reshape how the entire aviation industry handled discrimination incidents. Corporate Crisis Management Thread. Elena Martinez, Communications Director Jasmine. We're now trending worldwide on every platform. #Pinnacle. Air Karen has over 2 million posts. Legal wants to confirm we're proceeding with full transparency protocol. Jasmine. Confirmed. Mrs. Whitmore has provided the perfect case study. Recommend immediate press release and policy update announcement. Legal counsel, Sarah Kim. All recordings are legally obtained. Public space, no expectation of privacy. We're clear to use this for training purposes. Her statements about diversity quotas and people who don't belong are textbook discrimination examples. Damon Brooks, sweetheart, you've handled this perfectly. The training program we developed from this incident will help eliminate this kind of behavior across the entire industry. Jasmine. Thanks, Dad. Sometimes the best lessons come from letting people reveal who they really are. Victoria was now standing in the aisle, supported by one of the security officers because her legs seemed unable to hold her weight independently. Her carefully arranged appearance had completely dissolved. Her hair was disheveled, her makeup streaked, her designer clothing wrinkled from her emotional collapse. "Please," she whispered to Sergeant Martinez, "is there any way? Can I just apologize? Can I make this right somehow?" Marcus Wellington, the elderly passenger who had been watching the entire debacle with the fascination of someone who had lived through enough history to recognize a defining moment, cleared his throat. "My dear woman," he said gently, "some mistakes can't be unmade. The question is what you learn from them." Sophia Valencia, who was still processing the fact that she'd just been promised a promotion by the CEO himself, approached Victoria with a mixture of professional courtesy and personal satisfaction. "Mrs. Whitmore, I'll need your boarding pass and any Pinnacle Airways membership cards. Your Diamond Elite status has been revoked along with your lifetime ban." The practical implications of her actions were beginning to dawn on Victoria. No more first-class travel, no more Crown Elite lounges, no more premium airline status. Her entire social identity had been built around the exclusivity of luxury travel, and in the space of an hour she had destroyed it all. "What am I supposed to tell people?" Victoria asked, though she seemed to be talking more to herself than to anyone else. Jasmine looked up from her phone, and for the first time since the confrontation began, her expression showed something approaching sympathy. "Mrs. Whitmore," she said quietly, "maybe you could tell them the truth. That you learned assumptions can be expensive. That appearance doesn't determine worth. That dignity isn't determined by designer labels." Victoria stared at her, and for a moment the cabin saw a glimpse of the person she might have been if her privilege hadn't poisoned her perspective. "I'm sorry," Victoria whispered. "I'm genuinely sorry." "I know," Jasmine replied, "but sorry doesn't undo the words. It doesn't erase the recording. It doesn't change the fact that you spent an hour trying to have me removed from a plane my family owns because of how I look." The stark honesty of the statement hit the cabin like a cold wind. Everyone understood that they had witnessed something that went far beyond a simple airline incident. They had watched privilege meet consequence, prejudice meet justice, and assumption meet reality. Captain James Riley's voice crackled over the intercom one final time. "Ladies and gentlemen, we apologize for the extended delay. We'll be pushing back from the gate momentarily for our flight to London. Thank you for your patience." As security escorted Victoria toward the aircraft door, she turned back one final time. "Will this be all over the news?" Emma Thompson looked up from her phone where notifications were still pouring in from news outlets requesting interviews. "Ma'am, this isn't just news. This is viral history. Your behavior is going to be studied in business schools and diversity training programs for decades." Victoria's last expression as she disappeared down the jet bridge was one of complete, devastating comprehension. She had not just ruined her travel privileges or embarrassed herself in front of a few dozen passengers. She had created a permanent record of discriminatory behavior that would follow her for the rest of her life. The cabin door closed behind her with a definitive thud, and suddenly the atmosphere changed completely. Passengers began applauding, not the polite, restrained clapping of first-class travelers, but genuine, sustained applause born of witnessing justice served in real time. Jasmine Brooks, the 19-year-old in the gray hoodie who had just taught an entire aircraft about dignity, power, and the danger of assumptions, simply smiled and returned to her book. After all, she had a flight to catch, and somewhere over the Atlantic she had reports to write about the future of customer service in the aviation industry. The lesson was complete. The real journey could now begin. As the aircraft door sealed shut, sealing Victoria's fate on the other side, the atmosphere in the first-class cabin underwent a transformation that bordered on the mystical. It was as if the entire space had been holding its breath for the past hour and could finally exhale. Captain James Riley's voice came over the intercom, warm and professional. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain speaking. We're cleared for pushback, and should be airborne shortly. I want to personally apologize for the delay and commend our passengers and crew for maintaining their dignity throughout a challenging situation. Sometimes the most important journeys happen before we even leave the ground. Emma Thompson was still frantically managing her exploding social media accounts, but she paused to look directly at Jasmine. "Miss Brooks, I'm a travel journalist, and I have to ask, was this planned? Were you deliberately testing the system?" Jasmine carefully bookmarked her place in her paperback novel and looked up. "My father always taught me that the best way to understand how a system works is to observe how it treats people when it thinks no one important is watching." David Peterson leaned forward in his seat. "So this was a genuine customer experience assessment. Every passenger interaction is a learning opportunity," Jasmine replied. "But Mrs. Whitmore's behavior exceeded even our worst-case training scenarios. She provided us with a master class in discrimination that will help us train staff worldwide." Marcus Wellington, who had been quietly observing this exchange, smiled with genuine appreciation. "Young lady, you handled that situation with more grace and wisdom than many people twice your age. Your father must be very proud." Jasmine's phone buzzed with an incoming call. She glanced at the screen and smiled. "Speaking of my father," she answered on speaker, knowing that the entire cabin was listening. "Hi, Dad." Damon Brooks's voice filled the cabin with warmth and authority. "Jasmine, I've been monitoring the entire situation through our security protocols and social media streams. You demonstrated exactly the kind of leadership we need in this industry." "Thank you. I learned from watching you handle difficult situations with patience and strategic thinking. The footage from today will become the cornerstone of our new inclusion training program. Mrs. Whitmore unknowingly volunteered to demonstrate every form of passenger discrimination we need to eliminate from commercial aviation." Sophia Valencia, who had been listening to this conversation with growing amazement, finally spoke up. "Mr. Brooks, sir. This is Flight Attendant Valencia. I want to thank you for your support during the incident. Sophia, you maintained perfect professionalism while watching a passenger verbally assault my daughter. That takes character. Report to my office Monday morning to discuss your new position as Senior Training Coordinator for Customer Relations." Sophia's eyes filled with tears. "Sir, thank you. This means everything to me." Emma Thompson was documenting every word of this conversation, while simultaneously fielding interview requests from major news networks. Her phone was buzzing so constantly it sounded like an angry bee trapped in a jar. "Mr. Brooks," she called out, "I'm Emma Thompson, travel journalist. Would you be willing to provide a statement about what happened here today? Ms. Thompson, my daughter tells me you've been documenting this entire incident. Would you be interested in exclusive access to develop our discrimination awareness campaign? This story needs to be told properly." Emma nearly dropped her phone. "Sir, that would be... Yes. Absolutely yes." David Peterson raised his hand like he was in a business meeting. "Mr. Brooks, I'm David Peterson, Senior Director at Tech Innovation Corp. What your daughter did today, that was leadership at its finest. She turned a negative situation into a teachable moment for an entire industry." "Thank you, Mr. Peterson. Real leadership often means staying calm while others lose their composure. Jasmine has been preparing for this kind of situation since she was old enough to understand that people might judge her based on assumptions rather than character." The aircraft was now taxiing toward the runway, but nobody seemed to be thinking about their destination anymore. They were too caught up in the realization that they had witnessed something unprecedented, a perfect storm of prejudice meeting consequence in the most public way possible. Marcus Wellington leaned forward in his seat. "Miss Brooks, if I may ask, how often does this kind of discrimination happen to you?" Jasmine considered the question carefully. "More often than you might think, less often than it used to. The difference is that today I was in a position to do something about it that would create lasting change." Her phone buzzed with a text from her father's communications team. Elena Martinez Jasmine. We're now trending in 47 countries. Every major news outlet wants an interview. The White House press secretary just mentioned the incident in their daily briefing as an example of corporate accountability in action. Jasmine. Recommend we focus on the positive message, how the industry can do better, not just what went wrong today. Elena, perfect. You're thinking like a CEO already. Emma Thompson looked up from her phone, which was displaying a notification that her live stream had been viewed over 500,000 times in the past hour. Miss Brooks, you've essentially created the most powerful diversity training video in corporate history, and you did it in real time. Sometimes the best training comes from unscripted moments, Jasmine replied, Mrs. Whitmore gave us something no simulation could provide: authentic discriminatory behavior that we can use to teach people what to watch for and how to respond. Captain Riley's voice came over the intercom again. Flight attendants, please prepare the cabin for takeoff. And passengers, thank you for reminding us today that dignity isn't about the price of your ticket or the label on your clothes. It's about how we treat each other when it matters most. As the aircraft accelerated down the runway, passengers throughout first class were posting updates, sharing videos, and telling friends about what they had witnessed. The story was spreading across the internet like wildfire, but unlike most viral incidents, this one carried a message of hope rather than just outrage. Social media explosion, Twitter trends, #Pinnacle, Air Justice, 2.3M posts, #Dignity Not Designer. 1. 8M posts, #CEOs. Daughter wins. 956K posts, #Assume Nothing. 823K posts. Instagram. Emma Thompson's live stream. Highlight 1.2M views in 2 hours. David Peterson's LinkedIn post, 45K shares. And climbing TikTok, #Storytime. In first class, 876K videos and growing. As the aircraft climbed through 10,000 feet, Jasmine Brooks, the 19-year-old in the gray Harvard medical hoodie who had just revolutionized airline customer service training, opened her book again and returned to her reading. But not before sending one final text to her father-dad. I think we're ready to change the industry. Response. You already have, sweetheart. You already have. The real journey to London was just beginning, but the journey toward a more dignified flying experience for everyone had already reached cruising altitude. The Pinnacle Airways corporate headquarters in Atlanta erupted into controlled chaos the moment Victoria Whitmore was escorted off Flight 428. In the executive boardroom, Damon Brooks stood before a wall of monitors, displaying real-time social media feeds, news updates, and internal communication streams. Ladies and gentlemen, he said to the assembled senior staff, we have just witnessed the most effective customer service training demonstration in aviation history. And it cost us nothing but the price of removing one discriminatory passenger. Elena Martinez, the communications director, was fielding calls from major news networks while simultaneously coordinating the company's response strategy. Sir, CNN wants an exclusive interview. So do Fox Business, NBC, BBC, and about 30 other outlets. What's our messaging priority? Simple Damon replied, watching the live feed from Flight 428 as it climbed toward cruising altitude. This is about accountability, dignity, and the future of inclusive travel. My daughter didn't reveal her identity to embarrass Mrs. Whitmore. She revealed it to demonstrate that respect should be universal, not dependent on who you know. Meanwhile, back on the aircraft, passengers were discovering that their experience was far from over. Sophia Valencia approached each first-class passenger with handwritten apology notes and vouchers for future travel, but more importantly with a request. Excuse me, she said to David Peterson. Mr. Brooks would like to know if you'd be willing to participate in our new Passenger Advocacy Council. We're creating an advisory board of frequent travelers to help us develop better policies for handling discrimination incidents. David looked up from his laptop, where he was still composing social media posts about the incident. Are you serious? After what I just witnessed, I'd be honored to help make sure this never happens to anyone else. Similar conversations were happening throughout the cabin. Marcus Wellington was invited to share his perspective as a longtime traveler who had witnessed decades of changing social attitudes in aviation. Even passengers in economy class were being approached by flight attendants who had heard about the incident through crew communications. Emma Thompson's phone was buzzing so constantly that she finally had to put it on silent just to concentrate. Major news outlets were offering her unprecedented access and compensation for her footage and first-hand account. Text from CNN producer Emma: "Your live stream is the most compelling real-time documentation of workplace discrimination we've seen. Would you be interested in hosting a prime-time special on discrimination in travel?" Text from publishing agent Emma: "I represent several best-selling authors. Your story could be a book. Are you interested in discussing representation?" But Emma was more interested in the message she'd just received from Pinnacle Airways corporate communications team, Elena Martinez. "Ms. Thompson, would you be interested in developing an exclusive documentary series about discrimination in travel? We'd provide unprecedented access to our training programs and policy development process." Emma: "I'm absolutely interested. This story is bigger than one incident. It's about changing an entire industry culture." As Flight 428 reached cruising altitude, passengers were beginning to understand that they had become part of something historic. The incident wasn't just going viral, it was creating real immediate change in corporate policy. Jasmine's phone chimed with updates from her father's executive team. Legal department: "Jasmine, we're fast-tracking new discrimination response protocols based on today's incident. Every crew member will receive mandatory training using Mrs. Whitmore's behavior as a case study." Human resources: "We're implementing a zero-tolerance policy for passenger discrimination with immediate lifetime bans for verified incidents. Mrs. Whitmore's case will be the template. Customer relations passenger support requests are up 300%. People sharing their own discrimination stories and thanking us for taking a stand. This is unprecedented positive response." Training division: "Your assessment notes from the incident are being incorporated into our global training curriculum. Every Pinnacle Airways employee will see this footage as part of their certification process." Jasmine looked around the cabin, taking in the faces of passengers who had witnessed her methodical dismantling of Victoria's prejudice. They weren't looking at her with the awe or curiosity she sometimes encountered when people learned she was Damon Brooks's daughter. Instead, they were looking at her with respect for how she had handled the situation, for her grace under pressure, for her strategic patience. "Ladies and gentlemen," Captain Riley's voice came over the intercom, "I want to share some news from our corporate headquarters. In response to today's incident, Pinnacle Airways is immediately implementing new industry-leading anti-discrimination policies. Every employee will receive updated training, and we're establishing a passenger dignity council to ensure incidents like this never happen again on our aircraft." Spontaneous applause broke out throughout the cabin, but it wasn't the polite clapping of airline announcements. It was the genuine appreciation of people who had witnessed justice served and change implemented in real time. Sophia Valencia approached Jasmine's seat with a small gift box. "Miss Brooks, this is from the entire crew. We wanted to thank you for showing us how to handle discrimination with dignity and strength." Inside the box was a gold pin shaped like wings with an inscription, "Dignity in Flight, Inaugural Ambassador." It was Jasmine realized the first of what would become a company-wide recognition program for passengers and employees who stood up against discrimination. "Thank you," Jasmine said, genuinely moved. "But you all handled this perfectly. You followed protocol while supporting what was right." As news of the incident continued to spread across social media and traditional news outlets, the broader implications were becoming clear. This wasn't just about one airline or one discriminatory passenger. It was about accountability in the digital age, about the power of documenting injustice and about the responsibility of corporations to create inclusive environments. Breaking news updates. CNN Airline CEO's daughter exposes discrimination through undercover assessment. Fox Business Pinnacle Airways, stock up 8% after discrimination response. BBC U.S. airline incident sparks global conversation about travel dignity. Aviation Week industry experts call for adoption of Pinnacle's new discrimination protocols. By the time Flight 428 was halfway across the Atlantic, 3 other major airlines had announced they were reviewing their own discrimination policies. Victoria Whitmore had inadvertently triggered the most significant advancement in aviation inclusion policies in decades. Jasmine pulled out her tablet and began drafting what would become the framework for industry-wide change, the Dignity in Flight Initiative. A comprehensive approach to eliminating discrimination in commercial aviation. Today's incident demonstrates that discrimination in travel is not a customer service problem. It is a human rights issue that requires immediate, comprehensive action. The following recommendations will establish new standards for dignity, inclusion, and accountability in commercial aviation. As she typed, messages continued pouring in from passengers, crew members, and corporate executives around the world. But the most meaningful message came from her father, Damon Jasmine. What you accomplished today went beyond customer service assessment. You showed an entire industry how to stand up for dignity without losing your dignity in the process. I'm proud to call you my daughter, and I'm honored to have you as my eventual successor. Jasmine. Thanks, Dad. Just remember, sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is stay calm while others lose their composure. And sometimes the best lesson is letting people teach themselves who they really are. The revolution in airline customer service had begun at 37,000 feet, initiated by a 19-year-old in a hoodie who understood that true power comes not from demanding respect, but from commanding it through character. 3 hours into Flight 428, as the aircraft cruised smoothly over the North Atlantic, the cabin had settled into an atmosphere unlike anything the crew had ever experienced. Instead of the usual first-class isolation, passengers hidden behind privacy screens, absorbed in their own exclusive worlds, people were talking. Actually, talking, sharing stories, connecting over what they had witnessed. David Peterson had moved to the seat next to Marcus Wellington, and the 2 men were deep in conversation about discrimination they had witnessed in their respective industries. Emma Thompson was interviewing Sofia Valencia about her experience handling the incident, developing material for what was already being called the most important travel documentary in years. And in Seat 1A, Jasmine Brooks was video calling with students from her Harvard classmates who had been watching the live stream coverage and were amazed to see their quiet study partner at the center of a global conversation about dignity and justice. Jasmine. We're watching the news coverage, her roommate Sarah was saying through the tablet screen. CNN is calling you the quiet revolutionary who changed air travel. How does that feel? Jasmine smiled, glancing around the cabin where passengers were still sharing their own stories of travel discrimination with each other. It feels like the beginning of something important. But honestly, I didn't do anything special. I just refused to be moved from where I belonged. Her father's voice joined the call from his Atlanta office. Sometimes refusing to move is the most revolutionary act possible, sweetheart. Dr. King understood that. Rosa Parks understood it. And now you've shown a new generation what quiet resistance looks like. Emma Thompson, who had been listening to this conversation while reviewing her footage, approached Jasmine's seat. Miss Brooks, with your permission, I'd like to share something with you. She handed Jasmine her phone, which displayed a rapidly growing thread of messages from passengers on other flights, airport workers, airline employees, and travelers around the world. At Traveling Nurse Kim. Watching the hashtag Pinnacle. Air video made me cry. I've been judged on flights for wearing scrubs, told I looked suspicious. Thank you for showing us how to stand up with dignity. At Dad off 3 girls. My daughters watched your video and asked if they could be brave like the girl in the hoodie. You've given them a new role model. Airline employee. Maria, I work for a different airline, but we're already discussing implementing dignity training based on what happened on your flight. You've changed the entire industry. At Grandpa Joe, 87. Flew first class for 40 years. Never seen someone handle prejudice with such grace. That young lady has character money can't buy. This is what matters. Jasmine said, scrolling through hundreds of similar messages. Not that Mrs. Whitmore learned a lesson, but that other people feel empowered to stand up for themselves and others. Captain Riley's voice came over the intercom one final time before landing. Ladies and gentlemen, as we begin our descent into London Heathrow. I want to share some news from our corporate headquarters. Because of today's incident and the global response it generated, Pinnacle Airways is establishing the Dignity in Flight Foundation, a non-profit organization dedicated to eliminating discrimination in travel worldwide. Our passenger in Seat 1A will serve as the Foundation's first youth ambassador. The applause that followed was sustained and heartfelt, but Jasmine was already thinking beyond the recognition. She was thinking about the airline employees who would receive better training, the passengers who would feel safer standing up to discrimination, the industry-wide changes that would make travel more dignified for everyone. As the aircraft touched down at Heathrow, passengers began gathering their belongings, but the energy in the cabin remained electric. People were exchanging contact information, planning to stay connected, committed to continuing the conversation that had started in the sky. Sophia Valencia approached Jasmine one final time. Miss Brooks, I've been flying for 8 years, and I've seen a lot of difficult situations. But I've never seen someone turn a negative experience into such positive change. You didn't just handle discrimination, you transformed it into education. Sophia, you and your crew did exactly what you were trained to do. You maintained professionalism while supporting what was right. That's what made the difference. As passengers deplaned, many stopped to speak with Jasmine, to share their own stories, to thank her for showing them what dignity under pressure looked like. The elderly gentleman, Marcus Wellington, paused at her seat. Young lady, I've lived through civil rights movements, women's liberation, and decades of social change. What you did today, that patient strategic dismantling of prejudice while maintaining your own dignity, that's how real progress happens. Emma Thompson was the last passenger to leave, still filming, still documenting, but now as a partner in telling the story rather than just an observer. Jasmine, this story is going to change lives, not just because of what happened, but because of how you handled what happened. As Jasmine finally stood to leave the aircraft, she paused to look back at Seat 2B, Victoria's empty seat that had started this entire journey. She felt no satisfaction at Victoria's humiliation, no triumph at her downfall. Instead, she felt the weight of responsibility that came with having a platform to create change. Final text to Dad. Landing complete. Assessment concluded. Recommend immediate implementation of all proposed dignity protocols. This was never about one discriminatory passenger. It was about changing an entire culture of tolerance for intolerance. Response. Already in progress, sweetheart. By the time you're back in Boston, every major airline in the world will be revising their discrimination policies. You didn't just defend yourself today. You defended everyone who's ever been told they don't belong somewhere they've earned the right to be. 6 months later, the Pinnacle Airways Dignity and Flight Training Program had become the industry standard, adopted by airlines across 6 continents. Victoria Whitmore's public meltdown had cost her more than first-class privileges. Her husband's business partnerships dissolved under social media pressure, leading to their quiet divorce, and her retreat to a small apartment in Ohio where she worked at a travel agency booking economy flights for others, while reflecting on how assumptions can destroy everything you've built. Emma Thompson's documentary, 37,000 Feet of Justice, won 3 Emmy Awards, and launched her career as the leading voice in travel equality journalism. David Peterson started a corporate mentorship program for young professionals facing workplace discrimination, while Marcus Wellington established a scholarship fund for students pursuing careers in aviation and hospitality. Captain Riley became the face of Pinnacle's Inclusive Training Initiative, and Sofia Valencia now leads the most comprehensive anti-discrimination program in commercial aviation history. And Jasmine. She kept the gray Harvard medical hoodie, wearing it to every board meeting as she prepared to take over as CEO. Because sometimes the most powerful thing you can wear is authenticity, and the most revolutionary act is simply refusing to move when you belong exactly where you are. Her father's airline didn't just change its policies, it changed the world's understanding of what dignity in travel really means, one flight at a time. If this story moved you, if it reminded you that dignity isn't about designer labels or ticket prices, but about how we treat each other when it matters most, then please hit that like button. Share this video with someone who needs to hear that standing up for what's right doesn't require raising your voice. Sometimes the most powerful response is simply refusing to move when you belong exactly where you are. Subscribe to our channel if you believe in stories that show how ordinary moments can become extraordinary when someone chooses courage over comfort. And remember, the next time someone tries to make you feel like you don't belong somewhere, you've earned your place. Think of Jasmine Brooks in her Harvard medical hoodie, calmly proving that true class isn't about what you wear or what you pay, it's about who you choose to be when nobody thinks you have the power to change everything. Hit that notification bell, because the best stories aren't just entertainment. They're blueprints for building a world where everyone can fly with dignity no matter what they're wearing or where they came from. Thanks for watching, and remember, assumptions can be expensive, but dignity is always free.